Hello, welcome everybody to week 2 of Crystal Lake Publishing's The Author Journey Poetry with an exclamation point. I've got Colleen Anderson and Maxwell I. Gold, poets extraordinaire over here. Whoops, I just realized I'm not centered. And today we're going to be talking about finding inspiration. So I'm going to let these two introduce themselves in case you weren't here last week.
I'm Maxwell Ian Gold. I'm Colleen Anderson.
Max, you're looking very nice today.
I'm in Canada, West Coast, but of course, poetry can go anywhere, even to the stars. Carl Sagan, yes, we remember you. I write poetry, I write fiction, I even write a bit of nonfiction. I don't know, that's me. President of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association.
My name is Maxwell Gold. I'm a prose poet. I also write short stories as well. I've had a few poetry collections published here and there, and I'm based in Ohio. And I'm now the acting executive director of the Horror Writers Association.
Awesome. And we've got people filling up chat. So I want to say hi and welcome to everybody. Super cool. I'm Angela Yurko Smith, and that's all we need to know about that because I have something way more exciting to talk about. Okay, in the group, there was somebody that talked about their first, they haven't really written a lot of poetry or they felt a little bit nervous about doing poetry. So I'm going to boast on Genevieve Flynn, who wrote her very first poem in Tortured Willows. And that poem, she asked me about, I've never written a poem. How do I write a poem? And so I said, do maybe a pantoum, do some structure because you can just fill it in pretty easily. So she did. And she wrote When the Girls Began to Fall. And then she proceeded to win just about every freaking award out there for poetry with her first poem. So that is my thing to say. I know, right? No, we love her so much, Jean. You're great. No, but that is poetry. It's the inspiration, which is what we're talking about today. And anybody can do it. It doesn't matter if you've done it for a million years, and it doesn't matter if you've just started. So that is my take on this class and the mindset I want us all to get in. But first, we're going to talk about sharing some personal experiences where you guys have found unexpected inspiration for a poem. And how did you harness that moment and turn it into art? Fine art.
Well, I'm going to put this out there. Now, this is a poem in progress, but I was visiting one Angela Yuriko Smith recently in Brazil, where the roosters sounded like old men clearing their throats. And they were like,
This is true.
I got fixated because I was just going, those aren't real chickens. They're like disembodied people or something. And Angela has a dog named Chupacabra. So I had to put in a pitch for a poem. And I went, okay, there's the Chupacabras running around in the fields. And there's these chickens that sound like people and cats that howl like dogs. And I won't go into the rest of it, but that was my inspiration for this poem, was literally what I was hearing around me.
Oh, that's awesome. And all that is true. They do have those roosters here. How about you, Max?
So I guess I'll talk real quick about the first prose poem that I wrote was titled Adnagon, which was one of the entities that I use in my in my prose poetry or my cyber gods stuff. So it's the inspiration's probably a little obvious. So I wrote it in 2016. The night he who shall not be named was elected. But it was, I guess, the inspiration for me was just the dread and terror. Because most of the stuff that I write is more weird and cosmic fiction. So it was more or less writing something that was dreadful and terrifying.
He who shall not be named. I wonder who that was.
Voldemort, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think we're not supposed to name him either. So I do want to welcome everybody. I've been kind of throwing the hellos up. So welcome everybody again that's just popping in. I'm going to say a lot of my inspiration, sometimes my most unusual place for inspiration comes from slips of the tongue, like typos and things that you say that are wrong. For instance, I used to pronounce hyperbole as hyperbole because, hello, it's spelled that way. And then I was having a conversation with somebody one time about that. And I said something about, like, I was telling her the story. Yeah, I used to pronounce it hyperbole. She thought I said hyperbole, which is like totally appropriate for hyperbole. So that became a bunch of poems, or like mausoleum cake was another one. So I like accidental word usage. So you could kind of say that's like found poems in a way.
Yeah, sometimes it's fun to like. Sometimes I like to just either do like word trees, or sometimes I'll just like look at a word and then like either research the word or just um, you know I've done that with a few poems, just like researching a word and then going off on a tangent that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've also done like looking at something and going, what would be the weirdest, most antithesis of something? So if I'm looking out the window and it's like the trees are green right now because it's summer, I would be going, well, what would be the most weird antithesis? Like the trees are withering and worms are crawling out as leaves, or just take a normal image and try and distort it in some way, and then see if the story percolates from that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very cool. How about if you guys, this is kind of the opposite. That's about where we find inspiration, weird places. How about when we can't find inspiration? What are some of the things you guys do?
I use prompts. So on the internet, there's when my brother died, I was finding it hard to write, and I was grieving. So I was trying to keep writing, and I could only write short things like poems or little tiny flash pieces. So I actually looked at prompts on the internet. Rattle Poetry does an acrostic challenge every month. They put up an image, and you write a poem to whatever the image is, whatever it inspires you to. Black Hair does, I mean, they do flash fiction, but sometimes in flash fiction, it might be a poem that comes out instead, or, maybe I do a flash piece and a poem. So sometimes I just look for prompts.
So there's an exercise. I don't remember what it's called. I don't know if it's in this notebook or the other one. I also handwrite all my poems. I blame Linda Addison for that.
Oh.
I do a lot as well.
We just had a conversation about that on the Facebook group.
Well, I can't find. I know it was in here somewhere. But like, as I'm looking through all my, because I'm trying to find an example. I did it recently. So like there's a name for it where you either take a pen or a pencil and you just kind of because I did it on the flight home. You take and you make like you make 2, 3, 4 lines in like a square. Oh, here it is. And then okay, you make 2, 3, 4 lines in a square, and then you just kind of then you make sort of like half moons and like around the corners of each square, because it does. I'm not a neurologist or like I'm not a doctor, but what it does is it kind of it gets your it gets your brain working, like when you see shapes, when you create shapes. So like this, like you create shapes like this.
Oh yeah, like neurological writing or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean I've done this before, and like I wrote a poem called like Brain Scratches or something like that. I mean, but you do it after a while, and it just kind of gets you it's going to get you thinking. Someone mentioned something, and I thought it was kind of funny about, is eavesdropping a ethical source of found poetry? I wrote a poem called there was a steakhouse that I used to sit in for, I would just go in there and write, and I would just listen to words that people would say, and I would just write them down. And I wrote a poem that was published in Spectral Realms called like Around the Boulevard, because I would just listen to all these people talk, and like, so I guess the short answer is, depending on what you're writing, eavesdropping can be used like that.
It's kind of like a found poem, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I've done one that was just taking like blurbs I heard on the radio and from when we had the newspapers, and putting them together. And I did a poem that was in, what was it, Utopia, that was like that. So that's one way, especially if you're stuck. is just write down a whole bunch of lines you hear, whether it's eavesdropping or radio, and then start seeing if you can make something that flows from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to answer, Amy Dries actually answered Wolford's question earlier too about who you mentioned for the ekphrastic. It's rattle poetry, which you can find easily enough by Googling it. There was another one that I just got from you too, Colleen, and I put it in my newsletter. Is it Ito?
Who? What?
Ito, the one that you just sent me the other day. Now I've got to look it up. Darn it.
There was, I don't know,
Eugen, Engine Books and Kit Sora Photography.
Yeah,
anyways,
so
I'll share that in chat real quick.
Yeah, and that one's for 250 words based on a photo if you want to enter the contest. It used to be just for Canadians. I'm not sure if that's true, but you could actually do a poem and submit it to them for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for just a prompt anyways, because there's an image, write something.
Yeah. Where do I find my inspiration from? And I don't know why I keep going last, because I'm going to go first for the next one, because this is uncomfortable to be last, because I have to think of really intelligent things. As far as inspiration, I feel like that is not, inspiration's like everywhere, like everything. I probably have too much inspiration, which is why I have like so many half-finished things and unpublished things, because I write them, and then once it's done, I forget about it and put it away. But pretty much like everything is inspiration, I think. And I think if you look at everything like that, a snippet of conversation, eavesdropping, valid. A little snippet of poetry, graffiti on a wall, valid. Something, that you saw in the gutter. Everything is valid for poetry and to inspire us. Not only for poetry, but for writing in general, I think. So, and now, next question. Can you guys discuss the role of reading and analyzing other people's work in your own creative process? And how does this practice influence your own writing? And I'm going to start so that I don't have to be the last one. I'm going to go with that poem, The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. I feel like he has a longer name than that. But The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. When I read that, I was, I think, in like second grade, sitting on the playground, and I was just blown away, like transported to this other world where this beautiful highwayman. I don't think I even had like the idea of romance yet. It's probably why I don't really read romance, because this is my idea of romance. If nobody dies, it's not sexy. But so the highwayman is coming along, and the things like the moon is a ghostly galleon upon the cloudy sea struck me so much at that age that you could say the moon is in the sky and it's windy, or you could turn it into a ship and give it this whole kind of undisclosed backstory and make it this dramatic player in this poem. And then the other thing that really impressed me about that poem, critically, was that it's a tragedy. The girl dies. I guess this isn't a spoiler. It's a pretty old poem. But she shoots herself in the chest, which is actually pretty gory if you think about it. But it is described so beautifully. I think that's where that influenced a lot of my horror, that idea that the horrific can be beautiful. So that was probably the first critical reading I ever did of a poem. And it was me breaking down to see where is this magic in this poem? How does this happen? And for me, it was beautifying the horrific and putting a much bigger story in a basic thing, using metaphor. So how about you guys? Now I can sit back and relax because I don't have to think of a good answer.
As we have this pregnant pause. It's like sometimes, just reading like the poems that, like, why is one poem catching you and why doesn't another poem? Excuse me. I think that's part of like just looking at how the language goes together. Like you said, the moon was bright in the sky, or the moon was a ghostly galleon. One has more mood than the other one. Then a ghostly galleon even gives you the sense of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what gives movement? Is one word better than another? What stands out? So and also it's because poetry is often about what's taken out, like a story. Okay, that's maybe not true for prose poetry, but you're often taking out words. You're going for a very succinct image. You're going for impact and tension. So, I'm looking at like, everything like writing a sci-fi coup or a haiku or something that's really short. Like, how do you get that across and analyze that? And then you could even take the same poem, write it as a haiku, and then write it as a sestina, and then write it as an epic, and see how it changes, or go in reverse order there too.
Yeah, how about you, Max?
I guess for like particularly for like horror and like weird fiction, because I mean, I growing up, ironically I didn't read a lot of I didn't really read a lot of horror. I mean, I read a lot of like the classics, like Homer, Blake, all that. I mean, Blake can be a little terrifying, but I mean, for prose poetry in particular, Clark Ashton Smith is one of. I would recommend if you are interested in prose poetry, you can read Lovecraft, you can read Algernon Blackwood, or you can read some of those. But like if you want particularly weird poetry, I would start with Clark Ashton Smith. For me, it was that interest in the not so much the cosmic, but more of the mythologizing of these far off places that may have existed, or like like Hyperborea, and like all of these these lost civilizations, these nameless places. The Memnons of the Night is one of my favorites by Clark Ashton Smith. One of my favorite prose poems by him, because I mean each line is like a poem in and of itself. Just the first line. Ringed with a bronze horizon, which at a point immensely remote seems wielded with a blue brilliance of sky steel. They oppose the black splendor of the porphyritic forms to the sun's insuperable gaze. And that's just the first line. So, so yeah, I mean, for me, it's this particular poem, because there's just so much in each stanza of each line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading various classics of Blake, of course, Poe, of course, Ted Hughes, like not all spec, just a lot of the various classics, and you could, like, for inspiration too, you can take a poem that's been well known and write a response to it, write it or modernize it, like, oh yeah, you wrote this Lord Shelley back in the 1800s, but this is what's really happening.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And I probably should have brought that up in the one of the questions previously. Some of the other things that you can do is, like Colleen said, write a response. That's actually the collection I'm doing now, is I'm rewriting Hallucinated City by Mario de Andrade. But I'm writing it from the perspective of Rio de Sul. His poetry is about Sao Paulo. So that's kind of like, what you're saying. There's also, everybody here has probably heard this, Linda Addison. This is like my favorite thing by her. I attended one of her workshops, which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to attend one of Linda Addison's workshops, do not delay, do not pass go. Make sure you go there. I think each one is different and each one has been brilliant. But one of the things that I use from her all the time is, I don't know if you guys heard this from her, but reversing a poem. So if you take a poem that you have and you're like, maybe it's a little lackluster, it's not really sparking from you, for you, turn it inside out. So, light would become dark. I mean, obviously better than that. And then look at the new poem that you come up with. And that has been some of my favorite poems that I've done, is just simply turning something that, was all right, but it wasn't really jiving for me, and then turning it inside out, and then completely new perspective. The meaning wound up becoming apparent all on its own. And you could do that with anybody's poems, So yeah, inversion. Pixie says inversion. Yeah, just inverting everything. And we have a lot of comments about Ovid.
Yeah, I mean, you could go back.
This whole thing?
that old thing.
He just happens to have next to him. Oh, and you know what? We should say we apologize. Jamal couldn't make it tonight for this class, but you know, it will normally be the four of us. So, but let's move on. We talked about this a little bit. What specific elements do we focus on in these poems that we read? Like when we're critically analyzing, like I said, metaphor is a big one for me. Do you guys have anything that you really wind up looking for when you're analyzing poetry? Specifically to use for your own. I love this group, by the way. Now we're quoting poetry in chat. You guys are amazing.
I guess, like, so when I'm writing a prose poem, I try to, I mean, like in Memnon's, like I try to describe things not with as little prepositions as possible, but like I try to describe things. I guess imagery. I try to use as much imagery as possible. Rhythm is important, but I feel like when you're reading a prose poem, you should be walking into a picture or like a moment. Narrative isn't as important because it's only 300 words, 400 words. It just kind of depends. But like the imagery and the metaphor is like the most important piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like imagery, and I often look at what's the most unusual way I could describe something. I mean, it's not always, it does depend on the poem, but it's like every writer's at some point had to describe the sun or the moon, and it's like, how can we make that new and unique, which is super difficult because literally every writer's had some description of that. But it's like, comparing it to something like, there's a Laurie Anderson song with William Burroughs. And Laurie Anderson is a performance poet, musician. And the poem, the song starts out, the sun's coming up like a big bald head. And I just love that because it gives a really exact image, and it's very unusual. You don't think of the sun as a big bald head.
Well, and also, like, if you're writing weird fiction, if you're writing weird poetry, like that would be fun, like a big bald head. But like, but like in other genres as well, but particularly with weird fiction, like they're like buzzwords, and you have this in other genres, like avoiding words, like, and I've used them before, but like using them purposefully, like Promethean, Cyclopean, words that evoke like Lovecraft, because you use Cyclopean all the time. Things like that. Like if you're going to use words like that, either use it as maybe like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, or like only use it once. Like especially if you're writing a poem that's maybe like 50 lines or something, you should only use it. Like be very sparing with words like that.
Yeah, I see somebody's mentioned Angela Carter, and I love Angela Carter. And like even her fiction reads like poetry. It's very lyrical. It's beautifully painted. If I could use words as good as Angela Carter, if I could do half as good, I'd be happy.
Oh, that's awesome. And feel free in chat to be dropping questions. We will answer these as we go. Good information from everybody. And I am super tickled that we're quoting poetry in chat, which is just, we're all in the right spot. We all belong here. How about inspiration? Going back to inspiration, is there a different process for you from when you find it, when it just happens, when it's impromptu, or when you're actually trying to make it happen? Like when you're, say the difference between walking along and seeing something that inspires you as to making an ekphrastic based on, this prompt, this photographic prompt that I'm working from. Is there like a difference for you guys, or is it both the same? I mean, I think for me, okay, I was going to leave that because it was the pregnant pause again. No. No, well, I was just going to say for me, it's the difference between, now I lost what I was going to say. Go ahead, Colleen.
I mean, it can be different because sometimes, like if I'm writing to a prompt, it might not be that something inspired me directly. So, for example, I've written a couple sestinas, and sestinas, you've got 6 words, and it's 6 verses of 6 lines, and then the last verse is 3 lines, but each of those, 2 of each of those words show up in each line. There's a mathematical equation as to which order, so it actually takes a lot of work. And it's like, okay, well, what if I have these words? What if I write the last stanza first? And then it's like trying to work out the story going backwards. So, for a sestina is very, very complex like that. So that was a challenge of like, do I just pick 6 words and put them together? Or do I try and go like, the moon was a ghostly galleon upon, the whatever, I can't remember the rest of it. But, in that case, it might have been that ghostly might have been one of the words, and galleon, well, the line would be longer and you use one word in the middle and one word at the end. And it's like, how do you make that come together? How do you make that puzzle work? So in some ways, it's kind of like a challenge. Do I just pick some random words, or do I try and actually have a statement and put that together? And I mean, that's just one example with sestina, but sometimes I have to dig a little more. And then sometimes, looking at a picture or listening to a song does just inspire and, get some of the lines out.
Yeah.
So I may have missed it. Were you asking if there were patterns? Like if we purposely put patterns?
No. I was asking, what is the difference to you as the poet when it is something impromptu that comes up, or versus when you're working on it? So, like for instance, and I will lead here so that I can give you time to understand what I'm saying, because it is kind of a jumbled question. Getting in that flow state as artists, we all know that flow state. So I'm looking for what is the difference between being in that flow state, so Christine, I'm sorry, wrong poet. Genevieve Flynn's book, that came to her in a dream. And then she saw the whole thing, and then she just wrote out the poem, and it just flowed. And it was obviously an amazing poem. Versus like what Colleen's saying, like I do a lot of linked haiku, and those are and I do go with the 5-7-5 because I am looking at it as a puzzle. And so then there's not that flow necessarily because it's a lot of intellectual work. So I'm kind of like, what are the differences there, do you think? And do you prefer one over the other? I mean, obviously that's a stupid question because we'd all prefer to just be in the flow state 24/7, right?
So, okay. So I guess, I guess it depends. Like, most of the time when I'm writing prose poetry, it's just, what it makes, like, I just write it and it's just easy. Like, most of the time it's not planned. Like for me, I'll sometimes I'll start with a title. Sometimes I'll do a title first, but most of the time I'll write it, and then sometimes it changes completely because I'll handwrite it and I'll change it, and it'll change completely when I'm typing it. The only time, I guess, to your question, when it's planned is when I do like, I had a poem in a long prose poem in Cosmic Horror Monthly, and it was 3 or 4 parts. So the first part was like, it was like a prose poem, the first part, and they had sections, and then and then it went like concrete, like left indent, concrete, right indent, so like it jumped and led to the next section, and then there was like a center justified, then it led to the next. So like when I do a poem like that, there is a little bit of a plan, but when it's like 800-900 words, other than that, I guess it's just, you just see what happens.
Which is very much a poetry answer. That's a lot of it is just seeing what happens, which kind of leads into the question that we have in the chat from Wolford Jones. How do you know, and we're going to talk about enjambment, so we all love that. How do you know what you write is correct? For example, a free verse poem, I think it is a free verse poem, one that doesn't rhyme. I know the words are important because you are painting a picture. Oh, my camera's in the way. But how do you know where to break the line right? Should you even worry about the form? And I'm going to say yes, not as in structure, but like a form, but in the structure of your free verse even. And how do you focus? What do you focus on besides the words and the image you're portraying? So that's actually like quite a long question. But so talking about enjambment, who wants to start with that?
I can start with that. So line breaks are very important, and I drive some poets in my critique group crazy because I don't like using punctuation. To me, you don't need a period at the end. You don't need a comma if you're using your line breaks right. But that can be complicated because sometimes a line break is to put an emphasis on a line, and then you want that little pause so that when you come to the next line, it gives an extra meaning. So I do use that, and I wrote one poem that was in the Rhonda Parrish's Water anthology, and I think it's called Siren Song, and it was like, we are, and I would stop on the and. So you wouldn't normally do a line break on a weak word like and. You want nouns, you want verbs, you want something strong. But in this case, it was kind of like having that breathy kind of, we are fish sticks and salty summer days, and so with that, I did that very purposefully to have that emphasis and to have that kind of mystery built up. So and it's like also indentation. Where do you place the line? Do you actually space words out within that line? Sometimes you want to do that because you want to build in that. It's kind of like poetry has that visual aspect, almost like that acting, like you're building in almost the way it's spoken. So it's like she was hesitant. Hesitant might be on another line, or it might be across the page. So a lot of poems I write, I just do like that justify. But I also do ones where I do indent, like to be that is that continuation of thought, or it's got a lessening. There's the various reasons, but and there are poems that are completely visual poems. But and it's like my poem that's in the Riesling nominee for long form is a poem that can't be read out. It has to be read because it has binary, it has Morse code, and it's been a bitch for everyone who's had to format it because I've used across the page. I have left verses and I have right verses, and it's it's one of my maybe my most experimental poem. But I did this very specifically because I had two voices going back and forth. And there's kind of like the machine language coming in on the right hand side to what starts out as people talking. So there are various reasons, enjambment, line breaks, indentation, spacing. All of those can be important to how you impart your poem and what you want it to say.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm mixed. I mean, I prefer commas and periods. I mean, it's not, as Colleen said, it's not like you don't have to. Because I mean, I like if it is being read, like I prefer to like the reader to see like this is where, like this is where it goes. This is where you read. This is where you stop. My poem that came out in Cosmic Horror Monthly. Like you can kind of see a little bit just visually, so like it goes down, like there are commas after each of those, so it's like, I don't know where my hand is. Familiar voices, terrible places. Familiar voices, terrible places. So like, yeah. I mean, I don't want to rehash everything that Colleen said, but there was another question I wanted to I saw that I wanted to jump to.
From Wofford, or I've got Amy Dries.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, because I saw there was a comment about punctuation in the middle of the line. Yes, there's that, M dashes. And yeah, like when I wrote the Sestina, I did use
prefer M dashes. I've learned. I prefer semicolons, but like, I'm doing a chapter, and most editors you'll work with will prefer M dashes because it's more of a statement.
Especially with layout, like spatially on the page, I think is a good way. It gives a nice white space, which is actually important.
Mhm.
And then as far as talking about that, for me, I love doing the free verse with the internal rhyme. So breaking it up where it kind of doesn't seem to make sense, but forcing it to make sense, and then having the rhyme in there, because I do like rhyme. I know that it is the ugly stepchild of poetry right now, and nobody likes it. But I feel like there can be a place for it. Just being clever with it. You don't want to just, I splattered blood upon the wall, and now we're all just gonna fall. That's probably not going to be great. So, I have a question, and this is for me. Do I work in crowns as well as linked haiku? And what do I find most challenging about finding the end and beginning lines? I'm actually not sure what crown means unless you're talking about that central piece of the haiku that kind of summarizes it, or the surprise word. I don't think not surprise word, the surprise. Usually it's the last line, the kind of the final thing. So if you are talking about linked haiku, I would say no, I don't usually do that until the very, very end, because it's supposed to tell a story. And it's either gunsaku or rinsaku is that form where the haiku are linked. And one version of those, I always get those names mixed up. One version is when it's like a party doing it, like a bunch of people writing one poem in linked haiku. One is when you write the linked haiku. And then what is the most challenging part of finding the end and the beginning lines? I don't know, honestly. I mean, it just happens. It's magic. Now, a lot of times it is, because actual haiku in Japan doesn't follow the syllables like what we think of them as. They're more sounds. Like Tokyo, I think, has 7 sounds, which is what we translate to syllable. So it's actually completely different. So when we talk about haiku, we should specify English haiku, because we tend to go syllabic, except we don't even really do that anymore. That is based on the preference of the haikuist or the poet. So that's pretty much it, is just trying to find everything. And I do like to fit it in that tight little spot, because, but I feel like for me, that's where kind of like the more inspiration happens, because when you have to think about one word for half an hour to get the right word, there's a lot of thought that went into it. And then I have a comment from Pixie, and I hope that answered your question, Amy. And then Pixie talks about some more concrete, Maxwell. I'm actually not sure what that is referring to.
I do use a mixture of concrete, concrete meaning a little more of a visual aspect, in some of my poetry. There was a comment from INF, the author, Necessary Evil, film and NFT, that I just wanted to, in the formatting. Yes. Yeah. It depends.
I see that.
It depends on the poem. Like the one that I was showing was as I think Amy made the comment. It was ex oblivion, nothing out of the end. It's more for formatting and just for visual aesthetic, just depending on the poem. Usually, when I write a standard prose poem, it's usually like paragraph, stanza, and that's kind of like a standard, quote unquote standard prose poem form. But that I just wanted to speak on that comment because I just thought it was interesting.
This one?
Yeah. Like there are no rules.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, unless you're writing like a sestina or like a sonnet, unless you're writing something that has a
particular form. Yeah.
Form, like I don't know what form that poem that I showed you would qualify as. It's just it's a prose concrete something or other that I kind of just made up. So like
you can make up your own form. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where, I mean, they do the whole thing, like you have to copy the artists to find your own style, like visually painters and stuff do that all the time. Same thing with poets. We copy other poets until we find our own voice and what we like. And then Amy responds to the crown poems that link the stanzas by having the last line of one section beginning. No, not in haiku. I don't do that at all because I feel like it's so small. But in pantoums, yes, because that's kind of the form.
I've done that with couplets where you have two
Mhm.
lines, but my second line will sometimes lead to something that's in the next line, and I've seen that
Yeah.
done quite often actually with couplets.
Hmm. Yeah, and chat exploded with questions, so feel free to talk amongst yourselves as I scroll through these. Let's see. We have one for Colleen, which I think you answered already. I want to make sure we get to all of these, though.
Yeah, it's basically you can use punctuation in the middle or not. Sometimes you have to, like, even if I'm not using punctuation at the end of my lines, I have to in the middle just so that it makes sense. If I'm not
Yeah.
breaking it at this point, I need to have that pause.
Yeah, I think we should go with like the Fight Club rules here. There are no rules. The first rule is there are no rules. And this is another one on punctuation. How do you work out capitalization? I'm going to say that's up to you. Like, how do you think it looks good?
Yeah, I've seen both, but I
Mhm.
actually hate the ones where there's no where there's no capitalizing at the beginning, but there's periods at the end. It's kind of like, no, follow the rules.
Mhm.
But really, there are
Yeah.
no rules. We can break the rules. E.
Yeah, I guess
Cummings wrote
the
everything
only
lowercase, including his name.
rule I like, well, I guess that if there was a rule, it would be like if you're gonna do one of those things, just keep it consistent through the poem. If you're gonna have no punctuation, no punctuation throughout the poem. Like, obviously, unless you need necessary commas throughout, for breaths throughout the poem. And if you're going to do capitalization at the beginning of each line, do it throughout the poem. And I would say, writing the poem, yes and no. Like you are the creator of the poem, but at the same time, it depends on how, like, what voice you're writing in. Like if you're writing a poem, I don't know, like if you're writing a culturally specific poem, that needs to be read in a certain voice, that needs to be taken into account or something like that.
Yeah, I
And
think that's why
yes.
reading is just as much of an art as writing it. To perform a poem is a whole nother thing.
And also, like, you can create your poem, you can have your intent for the poem, but how people perceive it doesn't mean that they're all going to have the same idea. They might actually, I've written poems where I didn't even realize I was using symbolism until I read it a year or two later, or somebody came back and said, oh, you've got all this. And I was like, oh, wow, like it was a subconscious level I didn't even know about.
Yeah. I want to go back to what Max was just saying. There's always going to be that outlier. One of the things I love is switching up so that I have like no caps in but I also usually start with a haiku, and then I go with a really crazy hallucinism, internal rhyme, almost like stream of consciousness, and then I'll end with a haiku as kind of the cap. And usually, a lot of times they mirror, so it's like the point, and then a lot of crazy, and then the point, like reiterated. And I do tend to do like the haiku at the beginning and the end, like say with no punctuation or all lowercase or something. And then in the middle, I'll go with something else. But I am trying to distinguish the two voices there, So it is going along with what you're saying and also refuting what you're saying. So there's no rules, people.
So
I like poetry.
And also, like, haibun is a form where you have a block of prose and then you have a poem or a haiku.
Yeah.
So with that, you can change. You can do the haiku first. You can mix it up. I did one that was in Poetry Showcase last year that was a double haibun. So it had the paragraph and it had the haiku, and then it had another paragraph, and it was actually two different voices. So that's, and I see Wilfred's asking about haiku. There's a whole ton of forms that are like tanka, senru, haiku, seijo, and they have different numbers of lines. And like Angela said, haiku at 575. That's kind of traditional, but Japanese to English is not the same thing. And so you don't have to, if you're writing a haiku, stick to the 575. Sometimes we do because we want to just discipline ourselves, but you can kind of break it up and still kind kind of call it a haiku.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've done like Angela's done linked haiku. I've done chained to haiku chain. Same thing. So where you're writing a series that actually comes together to form, individual images or ideas or stories, and then together they form another story.
Mhm. I have a question from Amy for Maxwell. Do you mean ex oblivion, nothing out of the end?
Yes, yeah, that was the poem that was in the February issue
Okay.
of Cosmic Horror Monthly.
When the conversation's gone too far, I'm like, I'm just going to share that. I have no idea what we're talking about in the chat anymore. here's a comment. I believe we already talked about in the formatting, says Pixie. We've got another comment. Ezra Pounds, make it new. Yep, break molds as necessary, including form, whatever the poem demands, because that's how poetry evolves, right? If we all wrote the same, if we were all still writing, I don't know, think of I was going to say an awful form nobody likes, but that's really terrible of me to say. But we all have those poems, those like a sonnet, for instance. I don't know if there's a lot of fans of sonnets. If we all still wrote sonnets, you know what I mean? Like we have to break out and break things. And
Frank Kaufman is an example of someone who writes sonnets.
Yeah,
loves sonnet, but he makes up his own sonnet forms all the time.
Yes, if you want to write a sonnet, talk to Frank Kaufman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Eventually, I'll write.
I think we answered this. Yep, we did. And you guys are great with all the questions here. Absolutely, poems are liquid, and I 100% agree. Once you get your style, and then you don't even have to stick with it. I did linked haikus for like so long, and I absolutely loved it. And then one day I kind of woke up and was like, yep, I'm tired of that. And it was reading Mario de Andrade, and I fell in love with Teleucinism. So then I wrote a bunch of that, and then I made up a bunch of forms, and then I went back to, I still love haiku. I still love that tight little puzzle. So now I'm bracketing my poetry with haiku, so it's really whatever you want, that's why you're in this class. Oh, and here's my favorite comment. No rules. That's right. Takes the pressure off. But in the no rules, because we are trying to communicate, we do want to make sure that I think that's the only rule is, are you communicating with poetry? There's no rules as in form or anything like that, or punctuation necessarily. But if people don't understand what you're saying at all, even in a way that's intentional, that's probably not a good thing.
Well, there are rules with exceptions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And there are exceptions with rules.
Right.
So, Pixie, you need to go talk to Frank Kaufman.
And yet, if you want to try a sestina, I found that, a challenge, less scary than a sonnet for me.
The only time I wrote a sonnet, and I will never do it again, was for the James Aquilon's Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah.
And I basically wrote a prose poem and then reverse engineered it into a sonnet.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never do it again.
Never say never.
I did write a sonnet as a gift. It was awful, but the receiver liked it, and it was about his cat. And I can't remember what else, but yeah, it was a very specific sonnet. Amy Dries said she loves sestinas. They are wonderful puzzles that force you to innovate. Oh, and Fibonacci's. Like that has kind of been one of my favorites that I really just thought of the other day that I need to go back to some of those.
Yeah, Fibonacci's are fun. Like if you don't know, it's like the Fibonacci sequence. So you start with one line, that's one syllable, and then the next line is adding that syllable to the next. So it's 2. Then the next would be 3. The next would be 5. So it's exponential. And you can go as far as you want, or you can also do one that goes in reverse, like builds up and then builds down.
Yeah, exactly. I love the idea of reverse engineering to make a sonnet. Now I have to try that. It's going to be a beautiful disaster.
Yeah.
We still have questions coming in, and I had one final question for you guys because we are talking about inspiration. And then I just wanted to find out, what do you guys do when the inspiration is not coming? Are there any particular tools, techniques, or practices that you've found helpful And going with that, how do you cultivate a mindset or an environment that's conducive to finding inspiration? I mean, sometimes we don't have a choice. Like if you're a mom of 4 kids, that might be harder. That's why I started writing on my phone a lot, because I had 4 kids, and sometimes that 3 seconds that you have in the bus line is the time that you have to write poetry. And then something else I find, there's a particular track, I think it's called the Ganesha Mix on YouTube, and I'll actually put that in the resources. Now I've forgotten what they're called. What is it? When you have the tones and you're listening to the tones and they align your brain. I've told everybody about this a million times.
Neurofeedback.
Yeah, binaural beats. Binaural beats is something I use a lot too. And I will link those when we have our handout for this class. But what about you guys? Like, those are 2 things that I go to, and they have never failed me. If I have a deadline or something, I'll pop on binaural beats or that Ganesha soundtrack, and I'm going. And as far as cultivating a place of inspiration, I let my kids grow up and move out, and that's helped a lot.
They're not all gone.
Well, yes, but he did turn into a grown-up, so.
I like, if I'm really stuck, then it will be going like doing something ekphrastic, or just and this was one of Linda Addison's pieces, is just do a stream of consciousness, writing words down. Don't even think about it. Don't make sentences. Just let your brain flow, and then sit there afterwards and see if you can either pull something inspiring or start chalking out some words and see if you can make a poem of it. And again, like erasure poetry, right? It's actually really difficult. I've done a few, nothing what I'd call super successful, because you're taking like a page from a book or a magazine and you're trying to make a poem. It's actually really hard to do, but it might just, you might do that until you go, it's easier just to write down a poem. And Amy Dries says a pack of tarot cards. I know a fair number of people that use that as a technique to get the juices flowing. Yes. And my friends gave me a little set of story dice, so I could throw those down.
I've seen those.
And I do have like a book that's just like little 1-line things. It might be a picture or a line. It's like, there's a prompt.
Yeah, I agree. These are all good things coming up in chat for how everybody else finds inspiration. How about you, Max?
Well, what I was showing earlier with the like the writing, like, or the pictures, like sometimes I'll just do that, and then occasionally like something will come up, like, I'll look at the picture, I'll think of a word. Like Linda told me the same thing, just like I'll write a word, and then maybe I'll just start researching the word, and then just go from there, or I'll just start writing random stuff that doesn't make sense. And then a while ago I started like I had a character in some of my stories named what did I call him? Eaton Westerfell or something like that. That I used in some of my stories. I would write letters to him and then respond back to him.
That's cool. Did you guys hear that thunder?
Is that thunder?
That's what that is.
Oh.
Because I had that look like, oh, is my power going to go out? That's what that look meant. There's thunder happening. And we do have a question about the next assignment, which I do need to address that. Send us both poems if you have not gotten a chance, because we kind of started up and there was StokerCon and it was a little bit of a busy week for most of us. Go ahead and send us both poems next week. And then we will read and critique both of those. As far as the assignment for this next week, I'm going to put it in chat, but it's basically do something, one of the exercises or poems that we've mentioned this week. Go ahead and do that. Like we talked about Fibonacci's, we talked about, you can try a sonnet. I actually really want to see sonnets now, because now that I've said that, I feel guilty.
Yeah.
And I feel like I should write a sonnet. Sorry, Frank.
Hey, weren't we going to write a sludge sonnet?
Didn't we do that? I think we did that, didn't we?
But I don't know.
I think I did. I've got my list of poems that I owe. There's like David Bowie on there, Tragic Eyebrows. Yeah. I'll add that.
Yeah, we talked about like sci-fi coup chains,
Mhm.
Hyben, Tonka, Senru,
Yep.
Seijo, which is a Korean form. Um,
Oh, pantoums. We talked about pantoums.
yeah, couplets.
Mhm. Which I will say, I love pantoums for if you feel uncomfortable with writing a poem, because you really only have to write a few glorious lines, and then the way you arrange it, which, by the way, Excel spreadsheets are great for keeping track of that kind of complicated form. It seems complicated, but it's not. It's, you just really have to be careful with it. So that's a good one to start out with, is pantoums, I think. Never met a pantoum I didn't like. Oh, here we have more inspiration.
So for the list of the types of poetry, there's thousands of forms of poetry. There's, I think, does Poetry Foundation list a lot of forms with a short definition?
They do.
Yeah, so that's one place to kind of look if you want to just look up other forms or look at what the definitions are. I'm just trying to look at my list of resources and see.
Yeah, there will be a list, KT. I'll go ahead and put it in the group, and it'll also be in the handouts. There's also, like, my favorite book of all time by Edward Hirsch, the Poetry Glossary, or the Poets Glossary. That's on Amazon. I think that was in our list of recommended reading for last week. So, yep, we will spell these. There will be a list of these with this material. And so use form. Now, you don't have to use form, Pixie. We're just saying, based on what we've said, write a poem based on that. So you could use form if you want, or not. You could do a Fibonacci. If you go free verse, I would say try to do some of the techniques we talked about, like internal rhyme, the enjambment, intentionally choosing to use punctuation or not use punctuation.
Here's another resource that has different types of definitions of poems. It's shadowpoetry.com, and they give kind of good little definitions there as well.
I'm going to put that up on screen, and I just put that in chat. So I think that is pretty much it, unless you guys have anything else. Does anybody have any last questions in the chat? Oh, we do have a question. Oh, yeah. I don't really have any preferences. I like copy and pasted in the body of the email, so I have less things to open. Do you guys have any preferences?
Yeah, copy and paste on the body of the email is fine.
Okay. That's fine. If it's a Word doc, I don't mind either, but more would not care to have a PDF.
Yeah. I will say, make sure you keep a careful record of your poetry, because we are going to be turning it in at the end of this class, and Crystal Lake Publishing is going to select poetry generated from this class for their anthology. And I don't want to speak for them, but I'm positive, like, everybody's getting in based on the 12 poems. Will it be 12? Yeah, it will be 12 poems that you come up with at the end. So do keep track of these. Don't send them in an email and then let us keep track of them, because that is not a safe idea for your poetry. I'm just going to say, have you seen my inbox? In fine form, edited by Kate Braid. Oh, okay. I'm going to check that out. I'll actually check that out and add it to the list. That sounds like a good one.
And just some other suggested reading. You don't have to buy these, but like I would suggest, my cameras. It's The Dirges of Moldor by Lautremont. So this is a poetic novel, or a verse novel, but it's very good if you're interested in long form poetry. And this one's called Cain by I think Jean Toomer. So it's a series of like prose pieces and poems interspersed throughout them.
And there is, in fact, someone took and wrote Star Wars as a long epic poem, like the Odyssey, but with Star Wars. I think it came out last year or the year before.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It was actually brilliant. Like the way, I
have so many questions about copyright now, but this is not the place for it. That's what I was
You
going to
can
say. I know
also-
we probably
You
have
can also get
permission.
this Star Wars with sonnets.
Oh my
There
goodness.
you go. Yeah.
All right, I might like sonnets. All right, I'll give sonnets another chance. If we're going to do it like that. I want to talk about first. Tell me what you guys have coming up this week, if you do have anything, or anything exciting in your world, and then I'll tell the students what we have coming up collectively in our next class. Anybody exciting? Any exciting news that you guys have?
My poem, The Toadstone, which is in my collection that just came out through Eureka Publishing, which is called The
yes.
Lore of Inscrutable Dreams. So The Toadstone was in Penumbric, and they just sent me an email saying it's going to be in the best of Penumbric.
Look at that. It appeared in the corner. It's amazing how I just happen to have that in my thing.
That's magic.
I just released my third poetry collection.
Look at that.
Look at us. Look at us as poets.
Magic.
Bleeding
like it was
Rainbows and
bad.
Other Broken Spectrums. You can get it. You can get it online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, through the publisher, Hex Publishers. And the introduction was written by none other than Angela Eureka Smith.
Oh, that's right.
Well, mine had Linda Addison write the introduction, just so we can say we had lovely people who are very talented.
They are. I feel like we have favorites here. We've talked about Linda so many times now that her ears are burning. So I don't really have anything except I just got my copy of the Weird Tales that has a poem in it that I did, which was inspired by Max because he's so cosmically weird. I did a cosmic weird poem. Jonathan Bakery asked me to do a poem, and I was like, I'll ask Max. I don't know anything about cosmic poetry. And yes, Linda Addison is definitely worth talking about. So if you have not met this amazing Amazonian brilliant poet, she's definitely somebody you want to find. And I'm going to tell you guys for next week, it's week 3 already. We're going to be exploring language and imagery. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. We're going to talk about the power of descriptive language, which we've kind of covered a little bit here. Creating sensory experience with words, which I love, like using words that have a sound. Is that onomatopoeia? I always forget what the actual phrase for that is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then imagery exercises and examples. We're going to be giving some examples of like the moon is a ghostly galleon, or it was a windy night and there was a full moon. And
it
then
was a dark and stormy night.
Yeah. Like as tropey as that is, I've seen some really clever things done with that line because it's so tropey. But then we'll talk about your assignment next week, because we don't want to like muddy the waters too much. But that's pretty much it, everybody. And yes, this is recorded. So everybody can come back and watch it again. And also it'll be available for future students. So, and also don't turn in your work if you're watching this not in this class, because, we're probably not going to be there. And we put that back. And yeah, unless anybody has anything left to say, I think that closes this class. Hopefully Jamal Hodge will be with us next week. And I loved hearing and chatting poetry with you guys. Okay, I'm going to take that silence as no, nobody has anything else to say. Bye, guys. We look forward to reading your poetry this week. And we're expecting 2 poems from you. And we'll see you next week.